My name is Kayla Aruda,
Hassan 3.
Jessica Brown.
Andrew Foster.
and we decided to do our project on GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. We picked this topic because we feel that it's something that's relevant to everyone's life. Believe it or not, everyone has consumed GMOs at some point, whether or not they're aware of it. Most people, like myself, aren't aware of what GMOs are, as I was before the presentation started. Our goal here is to make people more aware of what GMOs are and to make them more conscious of the food they're eating. So what are GMOs? GMOs are genetically modified organisms. GMOs are the organisms that have whose genetic characteristics are altered and modified by genetic engineering. In over 60 countries, GMOs are banned. In our country, in the USA, they are not labeled and they have had no attempt to be banned. The GMO Lab Project. There was a study taken at Caen University in France comparing a group of lab rats to a control group that was not fed GM corn. The lab rats were fed GM corn and were monitored over a course of 2 years, which is the average rat lifespan. In the 2 years, the rats received tumors, kidney problems, and liver damage. Most of the rats had these problems for the 2 years or even up. 50 to 80% of the female rats suffered as opposed to male rats. The rats that were in the GM experiment were 2 to 3 times larger than the regular rats. This just goes to show how much of an impact the GM corn had on the rats, and it really destroyed their internal organs.
So some basic background information. The sale of genetically modified. It's good. Okay. The sale of genetically modified crops started in 1994 with the sale of flavor saver tomatoes modified to have longer shelf life. Little research has been made to study the long-term human health effects and environmental impacts caused by GM crops because they've only been in the market for about 20 years. In the U.S., the GM market is largely under-regulated with safety testing done completely by producers and not the FDA. Our position statement is, though it may be difficult to avoid eating GMOs entirely, you should be aware of what you are consuming and make a conscious effort to stray away from genetically modified food. Some common misconceptions. GM crops are not more nutritional than non-GM crops. Many biofortified GM crops only focus on one vitamin or mineral and generally decrease the amount of other nutrients. Examples include less isoflavones in soy, reduced vitamin E in the oil fat composition in canola, modified for vitamin A, and decreased levels of amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, nutritionally important trace elements in protein and rice. GM crops do not have higher crop yields. Some actually have lower due to gene disruption. The U.S. EPA, reviewed by the USDA, stated that after extensive testing, GM technology has not raised interesting yield of any crop. GM crops are also not more climate ready than conventional varieties. Monsanto's drought-resistant maize variety was taken off the market by the USDA shortly after release, as conventional versions were at least as effective with water management. This is expected as GM crops are modified versions of the best conventional types. GM crops also have not decreased the use of pesticides, but have accelerated it. 75% of all GM crops are modified to tolerate herbicides. Roundup-ready crops are almost completely resistant to Monsanto's Roundup weed killer and are sprayed with massive amounts of the chemicals as a result. And also, GM crops cannot solve world hunger problems. The crops do not produce more, are not more resistant to weather, and do not have more nutrition than conventional varieties. Hunger is not a lack of food, but lack of access. The world already produces enough food to feed itself, but hunger is caused by social, political, and economic barriers.
Although GMOs are one of the most dangerous health risks we face, GMOs are one of the easiest of our major problems to solve. Unlike trans fats or sugars, GMOs don't offer any perceived benefits. Furthermore, when consumers realize the health risks, they are highly motivated to choose brands without GMOs. Just a small percentage of the population switching to non-GMO brands will create a tipping point, forcing major food companies to quickly replace genetically modified ingredients. When the tipping point of consumer rejection was reached in Europe in 1999, within a single week, virtually all major food companies committed to remove genetically modified organisms. In the US, if even 5% of the population rejected genetically modified brands, it would be more than enough to reach the tipping point. Whatever the percentage, there are certainly far more people in the US who would buy non-GMO products if given a choice. In fact, 53% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs if they were labeled. Unlike Europe, the mainstream press has not covered the GM issue in the US. Thus, if you ask an average American, have you ever eaten a GMO product? 60% say no, 15% say I don't know. The success of the GM food industry in the US is based on consumer ignorance. Genetically engineering of food crops is as controversial as it is today, as ever today. As many of the large agro corporations that use this technology position themselves as the answer to the world food crisis and further consolidate the food and seed supply.
So far we've talked about how there are no current benefits to GMOs for the consumer. The only benefits are for that of the producer. There's also not enough testing on GM products to be placed on the market. And we've also covered the issues and effects including allergies, antibiotic resistance, pesticide exposure, unknown side effects, as well as the negative impact they have on the environment. So we're talking about the alternatives to GMOs. It can be complicated, but it really depends on the approach. When speaking on herbicides and pesticides, there are clear alternatives. Basically, changing from an industrial agriculture to a sustainable agriculture with a focus on crop rotation is a perfect alternative in this case. What crop rotation is planting different crops in the same land. What this does is keeps pests and weeds under control by depriving them of continuous food supply while increasing the fertility of the soil. This controls a wide variety of species in comparison to the few that is controlled by GM crops. This also doesn't result in ongoing pollution of air and water. So crop rotation is far preferable over chemical toxins or GM crops. The main difference between sustainable systems and our current industrial agricultural system is that industrial agriculture solves problems by developing new expensive products that must be purchased by growers, whereas sustainable systems solves problems by understanding and manipulating the elements of the system to achieve its goals. In this case, new products are less important than new knowledge. So when talking about solving the problem, basically just buy and cook non-GMO food. If you can't get your hands on some non-GMO products, the next best thing is going to be certified organic. Also, just become more aware of the situation at hand and become more conscious of personal food consumption. If possible, grow a personal garden, and also just spread the word. The more people who are eating non-GMO products, the more the non-GMO companies can produce. So we're talking about shopping non-GMO verified. There's an excellent website called the non-GMOproject.org. On this website, they list all verified non-GMO products. The non-GMO project also has a free iPhone app, and they also offer a cookbook that you can purchase on their website. So when cleaning GMOs out of your diet, it's important to understand the U.S. GM crops. 90% of the U.S. cotton crops are GM, 90% of the canola oil, 94% of soy, 88% of corn, 95% of sugar beet. Alfalfa, the first planted crop, was in 2011, so there's not much statistics on this. Papaya, most of the Hawaiian crops, approximately 988 acres are GM, and zucchini and squash, approximately 25,000 acres. So these are very common products that are found in a vast majority of the food we consume daily. Any questions?